Shi Qingxuan listened up to that point and couldn't manage to hold it in. He snorted a laugh. Is it very funny? Hua Cheng asked quietly. Shi Qingxuan knew it was inappropriate and instantly schooled his expression. Sorry, Your Highness, he apologized solemnly. Shi Lian smiled. Don't worry, I think it's pretty amusing too. He concluded, the Venerable of Empty Words draws power from fear in people's hearts. With this power, it manipulates its victims to realize its predictions and then makes new ones. The cycle continues until the person is thoroughly broken and their mind is lost to despair. The more unsteady one's heart, the more disadvantageous their position. The more one has, the more one fears loss. After a pause, he suggested, did one of Lord Windmaster's devotees request his help after receiving such a curse? You're the god of wind, so something like this isn't within your jurisdiction. If you receive such a prayer, you can pass it on to a martial god. It wasn't a devotee who ran into it, Shi Qingxuan replied. It was me. Now Shi Lian was even more amazed. You? Venerables of Empty Words usually don't dare target heavenly officials. Even if they tried, an esteemed heavenly official such as yourself need not fear them. Shi Qingxuan sighed. If I'd run into it after my ascension, then of course there would be nothing to worry about, but it's a long story. Many hundreds of years ago, when the Wind and Water Masters were still mortal, they were born and raised in an affluent, prosperous merchant household. Shi Qingxuan was the second son, and when he was born, the entire family rejoiced. They gave him the baby name Xuan. For the sake of building up good luck for the new child, they widely distributed congee and such fare to the hungry and performed acts of compassion. At the time, there was a fortune teller who, as he ate the congee, saw the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes. He asked for the details of his birth, then said, Since I've taken a meal from your household, I will tell you this. That son of yours might have a good life, but it's difficult to explain the whole story. If you want to keep him safe, know that he must be kept low profile. Don't raise him to be the ostentatious type. Don't give him the chance to shine, and build up an inheritance for him in subtle silence. This will ensure he lives a life of peace. Be sure to never host any celebratory feasts in his name, or you will invite something bad along with them. Now those were terribly unpleasant words, and very much like something a Venerable of Empty Words would say. The Shi family was a merchant household, and all the qualities the fortune-teller described were especially valuable to them. The fortune-teller was shooed away on the spot with a frown, and his words were naturally dismissed. A few days later, a feast was held in Shi Qingxuan's honor. The lanterns shone, and the banners flew. Drums thundered, and gongs sounded. At the feast, the guests hollered their congratulations, singing songs of praise to the second young master of the Shi family, wrapped in swaddling clothes. Then a sing-song voice suddenly rang out from the floor. Wretched beginning, wretched end. That voice came from below the ground, but it overtook the voices of everyone present. The crowd was dumbfounded with shock. The feast ended with apprehension thick in the air. That very night, baby Shi Qingxuan burned with fever, crying and dry-heaving non-stop. The fever wouldn't break no matter what was done, and the entire family was terrified out of their wits. The Shi family remembered that strange fortune-teller who they had kicked out not long ago, and they hastily searched all over to invite him back. I told you to keep a low profile, but you didn't listen, that fortune-teller scolded them. Now that the child has caught the eye of the Reverend, his life will be filled with endless peril. This bout of fever is nothing, and it will subside on its own. But this, it's nothing more than a welcoming gift. Of course, he was talking about a Venerable of Empty Words, but this wasn't a typical Venerable of Empty Words that could be chased away so easily. It was most ancient indeed, and strong in cultivation. How strong? Even without joyous occasions, it could still mourn. This was how it came to be called the Reverend of Empty Words. The sale of a single expensive item can feed a business that is otherwise quiet for years, and the Reverend was the very embodiment of this concept. Its eyes were viciously sharp, and it had a taste for prey of legendary character and earth-shaking destiny. Some managed to win against it, but their entire lives were devoted to the fight, and their constant struggles provided it with rich meals. Some were utterly destroyed and became its fuel. Having hoarded power for close to 1,000 years, its foundation was deep and solid. It had finally awoken after a century's rest, and had decided it was time to stretch its legs. And when it next opened its mouth to feed, it was eager to take a large bite. Shi Qingxuan had just been born and was incidentally exactly to its taste. Thus, he was reserved by the Reverend. Although the tiny baby couldn't understand its predictions even if he heard them, There would come a day when he could comprehend, just as there would come a day he knew fear. Once this fear was planted during the boy's childhood, it would burrow deep and become impossible to uproot. Fortunately, spirits and monsters like these didn't have much in the way of brains, and their way of thinking was bizarre. The fortune teller plotted out a way to trick it, and the Shi family put the plot into action. They sent Shi Qingxuan away and pretended he'd been given to another family, then dressed their son up to look like a female baby before bringing him back. The family then claimed that the female babe was an adopted daughter and raised the little young master as a little young mistress instead. As long as the Reverend of Empty Words could not find the male baby it had reserved, it surely wouldn't be able to remember who it had picked after some time passed. It was with this plot that Shi Qingxuan matured to 10 years of age in peace. Over those 10 years, the once wealthy merchant household gradually declined. The parents of the two elemental masters passed away, and internal conflicts over inheritance raged. Shi Wudu tired of it all, so the year he turned 16 he left home and brought with him the little Shi Qingxuan, who was younger by many years. The brothers depended on each other to survive. Shi Wudu was the first to enter the mountains to cultivate under a master, and he settled his little brother in a town at the foot of the mountain. Every day he cultivated and trained until late, not returning home until it was deep into the night. There was also nothing to eat in the mountains, so he could only take his meals at home. One fateful evening, Shi Wudu was caught up in sparring with another disciple and lost track of time. Shi Qingxuan waited and waited, but still his brother didn't come home. Worried that his brother was surely hungry by now, Shi Qingxuan decided to go up the mountain to deliver food. Shi Qingxuan was still a child at the time, and didn't know how to hike the dark, rugged paths at night. After walking for a long time, with the food box, he could no longer ignore the pressing need to relieve himself. Urgently, he pulled up his skirt at the side of the road. Just then, a figure cloaked in shadow approached from the far end of the mountain road. "Is it Xuaner up ahead?" Hearing someone call his baby name, Shi Qingxuan thought his brother had sent someone to find him. He hurriedly dropped his skirt and answered, "It's me!" That unfamiliar voice asked, "Were you born in such year, at such month, such day, such time?" Shi Qingxuan was surprised. Why the sudden request for his birth information? And furthermore, that person had it all correct. So he answered, "That's right. How did you know? Who are you? Do you know my brother?" That voice didn't respond to his questions. It finally said, "Come here and let me see your face properly." That sounded like a command. At this point, Shi Qingxuan finally sensed something amiss. He clutched the food box close to his chest and bolted. As he ran, he heard whirling wild winds behind him, cackling madly. That thing was chasing him, and it was close behind. It shouted, "You're going to fall this instant!" Shi Qingxuan was scared out of his wits, and when it said fall, he indeed tripped and fell, shattering the food box as he did. Rice spilled all over the ground. Just as the creature was about to pounce, Shi Wudu arrived. The Reverend of Empty Words vanished from sight when it saw someone had come. Shi Qingxuan's face was filthy with blood and rice from the fall, and Shi Wudu hugged his little brother close. Both of them were terrified and panicked. It had found them. Its prey was in its claws after so many years of searching, and the Reverend of Empty Words finally had its first taste of sweetness. From then on, it appeared regularly, each time more calculating than the last. The creature's cultivation was too strong. The Shi family fortune was already depleted, and the cultivators that Shi Wudu managed to hire could do nothing. He lacked the power to throw a million merits to have his voice heard directly by the heavens. Although the creature never demanded Shi Qingxuan's life, the two brothers knew that it was only biding its time, waiting until its prey had been fattened before the butchery. For the time being, it was gently slapping his face as a reminder to be afraid. But there would come a day when the slap would truly hurt. It was like a hunter who refused to kill their prey with a single arrow, and instead grazed it over and over to thoroughly relish its terror. This was very much like a death by 1,000 cuts. Fortunately, a turning point came. After years of aggressive training, Shi Wudu ascended. The moment he ascended, he immediately brought Shi Qingxuan to the middle court, and aggressively showered him with rare spiritual treasures and divine riches. A few years later, Shi Qingxuan also successfully ascended. The Reverend of Empty Words thus quieted and disappeared. Shi Qingxuan very naturally assumed that the creature knew it had been beaten, and had finally given up and backed off. But it seemed he was too optimistic. A few days prior, he was out drinking with a large group of friends, and in the midst of his drunkenness, he suddenly heard a ferocious voice in his ear. "You'll never see your brother again!" That voice was exceedingly familiar. From the age of 10 on, he had heard it at least once or twice every year until he finally ascended. The fear of that voice ran deep in his bones, and it was like thunder crashing in his ear. Shi Qingchuan sobered up instantly. Gripped with terror, he rushed to Pei Ming's domain and only relaxed when he personally saw Shi Wudu alive and well, socializing with Ling Wen and Pei Ming. He wondered if that voice had simply been his own delusion. After all, the creature had scared him profoundly when he was young. But he was still worried, so he set out on a mission to find Xie Lian and ask for his assistance, and dragged Ming Yi along for the ride. He hadn't expected to bump into Huacheng at Puchi Shrine. When it comes to enemies, the road is truly narrow. After listening to the story, Xie Lian commented, "So the one Lord Windmaster met and the ones I met are on completely different levels." Briefly thinking it over, he turned to Huacheng. "Sanlang, have you ever seen the Reverend of Empty Words?" Huacheng was toying with a pair of chopsticks in his hand. I've never seen it personally, but I know someone who has." Although Xie Lian was curious as to who this someone was, he didn't ask after them. He only said, "How strong is its cultivation, exactly? Is it really that powerful?" Huacheng tossed the chopsticks and replied lazily, "Very strong." Hearing this, Shi Qingchuan and Ming Yi's expressions grew somber and grave. "It's not a typical little minion," Huacheng added. "Certainly difficult to deal with." Although he said difficult to deal with, his expression remained unchanged, like he was only saying it out of courtesy. Regardless, it was not easy to elicit such a comment from Huacheng. "Lord Windmaster, this problem doesn't seem like a trifling matter," Xie Lian said. "Why not tell Lord Watermaster?" Shi Qingchuan waved his hand. No, you have to know. My brother is about to undergo another heavenly tribulation. What if he goes off and fights the Reverend of Empty Words, only to lose focus? I have to keep this a secret, and no one must know. I didn't say a word to anyone, and not even to officials who have a good relationship with my brother." Heavenly officials could undergo multiple heavenly tribulations. They weren't necessarily once-in-a-lifetime events. The more tribulations passed, the greater one's divine rank, the more unshakable one's status, and the stronger one's spiritual power. Shi Wudu had triumphed over 2 tribulations already, and Xie Lian had heard in the spiritual communication array's leisurely chatter that he was awaiting for the 3rd to occur any day now. It certainly wouldn't be good for him to lose focus. After all, failing to pass a tribulation meant, in turn, that one's divine rank would plummet. And that is chapter 50.